Okay, and welcome back. Hour number 2 on this Friday night. We're going to spend 2 hours now on a story that is nothing less than fantastic. It is almost unimaginably weird. We're going to talk to the son of the man who lived it. The first time that the son, Dan, will be talking anywhere about what his father went through, and we're very honored to have him with us. We'll get to him in a little while. First up, let me introduce and bring back Noe Torres, and we're going to say hello to Ruben Uriarte in just a moment as well. Noe, hi. Welcome back to the program.
Hello, Jeff. I'm very excited tonight. We're going to be hearing from Dan, as you mentioned, and I am so pleased that you were able to get this show lined up and get everybody together tonight.
My pleasure. Well, my friend, you did it, and Ruben as well. Ruben, are you there?
I'm here, and I'm calling from the San Francisco Bay Area, and happy to be on the show with Noe and you, and also Dan and the other guest, Brad Ho, down at the end of the show there.
Yeah. You've been hanging around Northern California for quite a while, Ruben.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm actually was raised here in this area, but I enjoy traveling and had some wonderful opportunities, and the Southwest is one of them, especially Texas and Mexico. So working with Noe, we've been able to really come up with some really good research over some very interesting cases. But this one here tonight, Aliens in the Forest, this one gives me goosebumps all the time.
I've never heard anything or read anything like it. We're going to hear recording segments from the man who experienced it as well. You've named this. Well, tell us about the name of the book, Aliens in the Forest, and where the book can be purchased. We've got a link to it. It's from, PR Log, Son of Aliens in the Forest. Eyewitness speaks for the first time. That's a press release about our program tonight. The book itself, Aliens in the Forest, where can people buy it? This is one amazing read.
Well, Jeff, it's a wonderful book based on the feedback we're getting. It's been the best-selling book that Ruben, Uriarte, and I have co-written so far. You know, it is close to, it's pretty much at the same level of sales where Mexico's Roswell was when we premiered that book in 2007, only this has gotten there a lot faster. And we did a presentation about aliens in the forest at the Roswell UFO Festival earlier this month, and we had over 300 people in the auditorium standing to hear that one. So it remains incredibly popular, and folks can get a copy if they'd like at roswellbooks.com. We also have video clips and a lot of additional information about the case at our website, roswellbooks.com.
Ruben, of all the books you have worked on with Noe, I guess you kind of feel this is certainly the strangest, without doubt.
Yes, this book, or actually the research goes back to a gentleman by the name of Paul Cerny. He was the principal investigator at the time. He has passed away, but back in 1965, he investigated his case. He interviewed Mr. Don Shrum, and he was with NICAP at the time. But I was very fortunate to have come across the files from Paul Cerny. Paul used to be involved with MUFON, and I had some of the cases that were passed on to me, and this was like in the back of the file there. And when I pulled it out, it was known as the bow and arrow case. And when I started thumbing through the archives, I said, "Oh my God!
You must have been amazed.
This actually happened."
Yeah. Well, the date of the event, the year was 1964, and the man it happened to, Donald Shrum. That's S-H-R-U-M. The book again is Aliens in the Forest, and it can be purchased by going to roswellbooks.com. Correct?
That's correct. Yes.
All right. You need to get that on Amazon too.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. We have links to Amazon from that website.
Very good. All right. Go ahead and let's set this up a little bit, either one of you, and then we'll listen to some clips. But what we should do, I think, is bring Dan Shrum on, the son, and have him sit in with us and listen to his father as his father works his way through with these clips, this unbelievable event. So, Dan, are you there? Mr. Dan Shrum, are you on? Not yet. We'll get him on in just a minute. So, the bow and arrow case is bizarre. Set this up for us, Noe, if you would.
Yes, sir. We had quite a lot of interesting experiences putting this book together and working with the Shrum family, with Dan, who wrote some of the material that went in the preface to the book, and also the late Judy Shrum, who unfortunately just passed away in May. That's Dan's mom, who was an important part of what happened afterward, keeping the family together despite the great pressures and the great stresses that came upon them. And I'm sure Dan will address that with us when he comes on a little bit later. But to set the stage about the incident itself, it happened on Friday, September 4th, 1964, and there were three men, including Mr. Shrum, Dan's dad, whose name was Don, or Donald Shrum. There were three men from the Aerojet Corporation of Sacramento. They all lived in the Sacramento area, and these three men would go out hunting frequently together. And this particular weekend in September 1964, they went hunting in the Tahoe National Forest, located about 80 miles northeast of Sacramento. They started early in the day on a Friday, and they kind of became separated throughout the day, and it got to be dark. And they had kind of made an agreement with each other that if they were ever in the forest, separated from each other, and it got to be dark, because of the area where they were, it was kind of a dangerous place. There had been bears sighted by other hunters and other predators, so they decided that they were going to find a safe place, safe haven for the night, and then regather at their original campsite the next morning.
Uh-huh.
So Mr. Shrum had kind of basically got lost and couldn't find his way that evening back to his two companions, so he decided to hole up in a tree where he was safe from most predators, that could attack during the night.
So he climbed up a tree to go to sleep for the night. I don't know that I'd be able to do that. Sleep.
Yeah, he had a military style belt that he used as a harness to harness himself up to a big branch up in this pine tree.
How interesting.
And he was intending to rest as best as he could there for the night.
Very
and
good.
It was when he was up in this tree that he saw a glowing light headed his way.
Mm-hmm.
And the first clip that we have here is basically him telling what his first impressions of that light were.
All right, let's see if we have Dan with us now. Are you there, Dan Shrum? Not yet. Okay, well, we're working on it. We'll get him. All right, what we're going to do is play some audio clips. And let's see here. Hold on just a second. Do we have a backup phone number for Dan? We're apparently not able to get him on that primary number.
Oh,
If you can, Noe or Ruben, if you can email me the phone number. I do have them, but we're not able to get Dan on the phone right yet.
Okay.
Let me see here.
Well, Ruben was in touch with him just a few moments ago, so Ruben can get him back on for you.
Okay, I'm sure the number I've got is correct, and I'll make sure that is retransmitted to the studio right now. We want to get him on as soon as possible. Okay, the number is correct, network, so he's there. All right. The first clip is, again, of Donald Shrum. When were these clips made? Do we know the audio clips? When were the interviews done?
Yes, Ruben did the interviews that these audio clips were taken from. He did a series of interviews with Mr. Shrum. And Ruben, that was a few years ago, right?
Right, that was right in September of 2005, in fact. And I was very fortunate to have met Don and Judy and Dan Shrum they invited me to be as a guest, and I had a chance to stay at their home. And it was Dan, Don's son, who actually assisted us with the video taping and the audio tape. So we basically have a great archive of what happened.
Very good. All right, let's take a break. We'll come right back and hear that first clip with Donald Shrum, and as recorded, as you just heard, Ruben, with him in just a couple of minutes. So stay right there. Okay, and we're back. Ruben Uriarte and Noe Torres and Mr. Dan Shrum. Dan, are you on the line now yet? All right, we are getting Dan Shrum. He'll be on momentarily. I did get that second number. Thank you, Ruben, and we're calling him right now. All right, what we're going to do is listen to the first audio clip from Donald Shrum, the father, and here we go.
Like a lantern going up and down a trail, but then it came over there.
Let me start that back again here. Here we go.
I saw a light. It looked like a lantern going up and down a trail, but then it came over the top of a tree, and I got kind of excited then because I thought it was a helicopter from the Forest Service. I stood between two of the fires that I built on the rock and waved my arms and yelled and screamed, and finally that light started coming towards me. So I was really relieved then because I thought it was a helicopter still, until it got within, maybe 60 feet or yards. I'm not sure the distance at night, but it just hovered there with no sound. So then I panicked because I knew it was no helicopter. I thought it was something from outer space, but it looked like all I could see is about an 8-inch glow. So I thought it was just a little tiny, flying saucer. And then I kind of panicked, and I threw my bow up in the tree again and hand walked out there that limb and got up in the tree. I had all camouflage clothing on, so I figured, well, they won't see me here, But then this light went a half circle around me over the canyon. Then I could see the shadow of the whole spacecraft, and that was just a light that was on the nose of it.
Pretty amazing to be up there alone. He had his bow and arrow with him, camos on, and this enormous craft flying overhead. Nobody else around. He sounds as if he was able to literally it sounds like he was still living the experience. I mean, you hear in his voice, and this had been, 40 years before? Something like that? How far before was the actual event, Ruben?
The event? I'm sorry, what was the question again?
How far in the past was the event at the time of the interview?
Yeah, well, the actual event happened September 5th of 1964.
Yeah, and when did you interview him?
And I interviewed him in September 2005. And it was we were able to do the audio as well as the actual video clips of him. 41
years, and as I say, it sounds like he's still right there.
That's the thing about this whole case. I'm interviewing Don, and basically he was answering to almost the similar questions that Mr. Paul Cerny did back in 1965. And so 40-plus years later, with additional questions, just seeing his expressions, just seeing him reliving it, he took me there to that particular place, just listening to his story. And every time he would mention and go in depth, you could tell that it really affected him. Not only him, but as well as his entire family, which I'm sure Dan will share with you.
Sure. Dan is online with us right now. Welcome to the program, Dan. Thank you very much for being here.
Oh, good evening.
Hi. We're going to turn him up a little louder so we can hear him. Turn Ruben down. Let's see if we can get a little more volume out of Dan. All right, Dan, say something.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Oh, good, good.
Did your dad ever take you back to the location of this event?
No. I think he tried to shield. Well, him and my mom tried to shield us kids as much as possible because of the incident that happened on the base housing, where they had the two men come in and interview him and try to just really berate my dad, and so I think they kind of tried to shield us. And
all right, let's go back to that now. As you recall it, how soon after the event did the two men come to the house?
To our house?
Well, you say two men came to try to talk your father out of the story, basically.
Well, that was on. It was base housing. They actually set up a meeting for my dad, and my mom was there, and they had like an old woolen sack, reel to reel, out there, and it was, nobody had lived in these houses. It was just completely vacant and empty. But they tried to tell my dad he was drunk, and he was seeing things, and there was maneuvers, and just every kind of unbearable
right.
lie you can think of, just trying to dissuade him.
What agency did these men say they were from? Did they identify themselves as military, government, or how did it come off? And were they wearing black?
I think they were just regular civilian clothes. If my mom, if I gathered that right from my mom. Nothing really special. I don't really.
Okay, I'm trying to get his connection here. How did they find out about this and contact your dad? What's the chronology of events? You had the actual experience in the forest. Dad comes home. He told obviously somebody, and somehow the government found out about this, or did he report it? And he worked for Aerojet at the time, I understand.
Well, I think the first person they ever contacted was my Uncle Gerald, who was a nuclear physicist at the time. And so they figured, well, he would know about radiation because my dad was fatigued, chest hurting, and they just, nobody knew what the symptoms of radiation sickness or poisoning was. So so they went to him, and he said, well, I'm sorry, that was another time. Well, it's kind of weird. There's so many things that have kind of happened in our lives that I kind of get to jump around as far as the timeline.
But how do you think that the two men originally found out that your dad had experienced something, and they were dispatched to try to talk him out of it? How'd they find that out?
If I could just pop in for a second.
Go ahead, Ruben,
Yeah, this is Noe.
I'm sorry, Noe, go ahead.
In the book, Mr. Shrum told us that his mother-in-law knew an astronomy professor of hers that lived in the Sacramento area. And because, this was related to something weird coming out of the sky, they contacted this astronomy professor, and actually he kind of interviewed them over the phone, and then later they went to see him. And unbeknownst to them, later this astronomy professor from Sacramento contacted the local air base, the Air Force base. There were actually two Air Force bases in Sacramento, and he contacted one of them, and somehow, of course, once he made that initial contact with the Air Force contacted their division at Wright-Patterson Air Base near Dayton, Ohio. Of course, the legendary air base that's been connected to so many UFO incidents. And the two Air Force officers were dispatched out of Wright-Patterson to set up this special meeting with Mr. Shrum and to try to dissuade him from pursuing this, any further revelation of his incident, and to try to convince him that what he saw was nothing more than some conventional explanation. Surely would explain it all away. So that was a sequence of events, related to the Air Force's involvement in the case.
Okay.
And the other interesting thing is that after he talked to those two men, after he and Mrs. Shrum talked to the two Air Force men out of Wright-Patterson, later, a week or two later, Mr. Shrum and several other of his friends and relatives went out to the scene of the incident and they saw that somebody had been there in large numbers and had essentially raked the whole area around the tree. I think he said a 50 diameter circle around the tree where Mr. Shrum had been when he had his UFO encounter had all been completely raked clean and everything picked up. So obviously somebody at the Air Force, although they claimed that his story was just a delusion, somebody at the Air Force obviously took it very seriously and went out there to the scene, cleaned everything up.
How did they find the exact location? Dan, what is the pointer that led them to the exact spot? Do we know?
I believe it was my dad. He actually told them. I mean, he was pretty trusting. Well, everybody was pretty trusting of the Air Force at that time. So.
Yeah, he gave him a map with the exact location pinpointed on it. And he gave us a copy of that same map, which he redrew later. And there would have been no difficulty for anybody to find it because he had drawn very clearly where Loch Leven Lakes were, where they established the original base camp, and then he put the distance between points to where the tree was, where he had his encounter. And so, I mean, everything was laid out for the Air Force. All they had to do was just take that map that Mr. Shrum drew and just go out to the scene. You know, it was nothing for them to do that.
All right, very interesting. How many in your family, Dan?
I have 2 older sisters.
And so there were 5 of you, and all were involved with this. How did you relate to your dad when he told you this story? How did it go over with the family?
They never really told me. I kind of grew up hearing it in conversation with uncles and, close relatives. So I just kind of grew up around it. I remember I was up at I was being babysat by a friend in the 70s, I believe. And he went down to KGO radio in San Francisco and did the first on-air program, or actually his testimony.
So your dad went on KGO?
Yeah. That was years ago.
Yeah. Wait, approximately when?
Oh, it would have been late 70s, I think.
When the 2 men tried to dissuade him from remembering what he had been through, how successful were they?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
How successful were the 2 men who tried to talk your dad out of what he had experienced? Did they?
Well, not successful at all, because you call my dad a liar and he's gonna get pretty angry. He's kind of a righteous person, upright, do the right thing, and so they basically were calling him a liar, and he started getting really upset. So
good for him.
Jeff, I wanted to mention that in clip number 7, Mr. Shrum talks about speaking to the Air Force. If you wanted to put that in, if you have a chance.
Sure, you want to play that right now?
Yeah, number 7, the after effect.
Okay, we'll do that. All right, here we go.
Did you have any nightmares or?
Well, for a year, I had screaming nightmares. I'd wake up yelling, those eyes, and I'd be just a cold sweat, just be drenched with sweat.
So what happened before the Air Force?
Well, they made an appointment with 2 post-student representatives of the Air Force, and they tried to disillusion me. They said, well, the Japanese might have had somebody up there, they were still... And they said it was Boy Scouts dressed up, in costume just to scare somebody. And I said, yeah, I'm sure they're going to spend all night and keep a guy in a tree, Oh, then they said the Army probably bivouacked up there and was in a training camp. So my father-in-law was in the Air Force. So he called and found out there was no military in that area for any reason, because it was a pretty desolate area. And they tried to disillusion me in every way they could. And they took the Arrowhead, the main one, and they said, well, we'll get back to you, and you can have this back as soon as we get through with it, which I never did. But when I went back up there during rifle season, I found the other arrow, the 3rd one. And when we went back, the area had been raked. There's an area probably 50 feet around that tree, and there was cigarette packages and cigar butts, and so I know the Air Force checked it out pretty good. And they had an easy way to find it, because there's an orange circle around that tree where it caught little fires, and it was showing orange, so they had no problem finding it. And I marked on the map that they had where it was, the location.
Am I hearing right, Ruben, that the two guys from the Air Force tried to tell him that this was possibly some Japanese left over from World War II? Is that what?
I always chuckle when I hear that. Yes, they were trying to dissuade him and saying that they're renegade Japanese, referring back to World War II.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they throw out the Boy Scouts, and as Don had mentioned, he just wasn't going to buy their explanations, because it was all, this is all part of the trying to negate his story. So yes, that's exactly true, and
pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing at lengths that they go through. One thing that Don mentioned in there, and in fact, last week I had an opportunity with Noe's help. I went up to that area, and I was approximately about 2 miles from the actual location, but it's I wasn't able to hike or climb, but it's a very rugged area. Both Noe and I were just totally amazed with how thick that area is in terms of forest and a lot of granite rock formations. And even though the main road is it's Highway Interstate 80, and then there's a frontage road, which is the old Highway 40, where Don and his companions had camp out not too far away from the main road. But once you leave that, you're in total wilderness. So just trying to climb up those steep rocks. Eventually, we hope to go there and find to ground zero. But it gave us a really good idea how rough and terrain that was.
Dan Shrum, the family, and you heard them say that your dad had, and you heard your dad say he had screaming nightmares for a year. How did he eventually deal with this? He sounds like a very pragmatic man, very logical, no nonsense.
Well, I don't know. As a kid, we just kind of we did a lot of family, outings, camping, going up to my uncle's. We were always pretty busy, so I think maybe that was kind of his way of, getting away from it. From starting with my oldest sister and then the second sister. Mm-hmm. But my whole childhood was kind of filled with camping trips and this and that. So I think it was just kind of preoccupation to dull it. Mm-hmm. The pain, I guess.
Makes sense. Well, he went through something that we're going to hear more about as we go on. Noe, go ahead and pick up the story. We've got more audio clips whenever you'd like. So.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Dan just said, that Mr. Shrum indicated that one of the things that was helpful to him in the healing process, later on he underwent regressive hypnotherapy at the suggestion of a number of folks who were working on the case at that time, including Paul Cerny. So the hypnotherapist was able to take Mr. Shrum back to the night that he was up in that tree and he saw the 150-foot-long UFO hovering just a short distance from him, and then he encountered these strange beings that came up and looked straight up into the tree at him. And it became clear to Mr. Shrum that they never had been able to reach him, even though he was blacked out for part of the time. It gave him a great peace of mind to know that they had never actually reached him, and he was able to keep himself from being abducted. So that also, I think, helped Jeff in terms of bringing him some peace of mind in the years afterward, when he was trying to recover and suffering some of the symptoms of what we would now call post-traumatic stress syndrome. It was unknown, of course, in the early 60s.
Yes, of course.
But continuing the story, Mr. Shrum was up in that tree. He saw what he describes as the mothership, which was this large cylindrical object, 150 feet in length, about the size of a 14-story building turned on its side, And then he saw 3 windows appear on the side of the ship, on its hull, 3 rectangular windows, and a smaller ship came out of the middle window, as we're going to hear in clip number 2, the scout ship arrived.
Very good. We'll do that in just a couple of minutes as we continue. Clip with Donald Shrum describing the amazing ship that hovered right near the tree he was in. Next. Glad you're with us tonight as we work our way through a fascinating story. Just sit back and get ready for what you're going to hear. This is amazing. For the first time, the son of the man who experienced this, Donald Shrum, Dan Shrum, is with us, and he is talking to all of us, speaking out for the first time anywhere in the world about this. Did you get to a point later on that this was talked about openly and very often in the family, Dan, or was it just kind of swept aside and put in a footlocker and left to its own devices? What happened? How did your family handle it over the years?
Well, me being the youngest, my perception, of course, is different from my oldest sister.
Mm-hmm.
She was, I think, 2 at the time when this incident happened.
How old were you?
I wasn't even born yet.
Are you telling me you can't remember?
No, I mean, I was born in 1970, but growing up...
Just kidding, Dan.
Sorry. But, growing up in it, they just... my mom would have her folder out, which would have a lot of UFO clippings. She wanted to know why this thing happened to her husband, and like I said, she tried to shield us kids from, we never went to UFO conventions or anything like that. We just kind of grew up a normal family, and
sure.
It's my dad, us children, and my mom were very, very important to him.
Did he ever sit you down as a family and kind of once and for all, I'm going to tell you the whole story right now, so you all have a complete understanding of it and you can grasp it and hold it, or did it just kind of come out in pieces over time?
It was just never. It was kind of one of those normal things where he'd talk to my mom and say, oh yeah, this thing that happened, da da da, and then she would say, oh yeah, and so we kind of heard it, bits and pieces, kind of growing up, and then.
I see.
Yeah, it was never kind of a sit down.
Never formally presented, so to speak. Okay.
Yeah, good. We had a couple people show up at the house, and of course, as kids were ushered outside to play, and and later on we heard that they were. I think one of them was hypnotist maybe, or
hypnotherapist. Yeah,
again, I was just a little kid.
Who sent these 2 people? Did your dad request them, and they came out to help him try to remember more? Did someone else send them? Do you know? That's interesting.
I think Noe could probably answer that a lot better.
What about that, Noe?
That was Paul Cerny, who at the time was representing NICAP.
Ah, okay.
And he had some friends who had done hypnotherapy on UFO abductees, UFO eyewitnesses. So he arranged for this hypnotherapist to go visit Mr. Shrum.
Very good. All right, let's listen to the second clip now of Donald Shrum talking about the enormous craft that came up down the ridge line and adjacent to the tree he was up in for the night. This is quite a thing.
And then I saw 3 panels of light, like windows or whatever, and I saw a flash come from the bottom of the center one, and just saw a dark object go down in the canyon, and then I lost track of it. Then the next thing I saw a little blinking light up on the top of originally where the first one came from. Well, at that time, all I saw was a flash and saw a dark object go down.
The dark object, what shape was it?
Well, I couldn't really say. It went so fast. But then I saw when it landed up on the ridge that I could see like a half. I could only see part of the top, but it had a little light on it. Looked like the top of a flying saucer that I'd seen in pictures.
Like a dome? Or
yes. Yeah, like a dome.
So an object left we'll call it a mothership, and it flew down and then it flew up and landed fairly near Donald Shrum. Is that correct, Noe?
Yeah, that's correct. And that was when, just a few moments later, he heard this trudging through the bushes, and it was clear to him that something was headed his way. And when you have a chance, you're going to listen. We're going to hear in the next clip when he describes the coming of these strange beings that appeared on the scene just a few moments after this smaller ship landed near him.
Okay. All right, let's take a listen.
And I heard some thrashing through the brush, and probably 5-10 minutes, these two humanoids come out of the brush, and they kind of broke some of the brush off and was looking at it. And then they came straight underneath the tree and looked up at me. And I knew right then I was fingered.
They found you?
Yeah, they found me.
Can you describe them for us? Tell us briefly what they
Yeah, they looked like 4 to 5 feet. Of course, I'm looking down at them, so they'd be shorter than they probably are. And they had a silvery, like a one-piece suit on, and it seemed like it had the joints, puffy joints, you know, on the shoulders and the elbows, and the legs I didn't see that clear.
Were you able to see their faces?
No, it was just a kind of a dark shadow. I could see the two like eyes that looked like welding goggles to me. They're the same as welding goggles, about 2 inches in diameter. It reminded me, just like I said, like a welding goggles. And then the rest of the face was kind of a blur. I couldn't see looking down at them.
That's obviously a typical World War II Japanese military uniform, isn't it?
Uniform.
Just kidding, guys. That's a very good description of something that is very frightening. How high off the ground was your dad, Dan Shrum, approximately in that tree?
Oh, you know, I'm not too much of a detail person. I mean, like I said, I kind of refer to others. My mother kept all that information, so I've got bits and pieces, and it's kind of scattered. So I kind of leave it to experts like Noe or Ruben.
She was very supportive, obviously, a wonderful mom, great companion.
Mm-hmm. He was about 6 feet off the ground, Jeff. He got up on top of a large boulder. And then from the top of the boulder to the nearest branch of the tree was about 6 feet. So these creatures, these two humanoids that appeared on the scene, were standing right at the base of the tree, just a little bit more than 6 feet below him. Looking up at him, he could see these huge round eyes that looked like the humanoids were wearing goggles. That was the impression that he got.
Were they or were they not wearing eye cover? What do we think?
He doesn't know for sure. I've heard him in many interviews, including the original interviews that Paul Cerny did back in 1965, and compared it to what he told Ruben in 2007. There's very little variation in his story. The rest of their faces was just kind of a dark void, and the only thing that he could really distinguish were these roundish eyes, large round eyes, and that kind of dominated the face, and the rest of the face was just dark, is the only way that he described it.
And this, what time of day is this again, approximately, Noe?
Okay, the whole thing, sundown was at about 7 p.m. Pacific time that day, and he sighted the mothership about 2 hours after sundown, which would be about 9 p.m. Pacific. And then a humanoid appeared sometime between 9:30 and 10 p.m.
I know if he jumps up on a boulder, let's say it's 3 or 4 feet tall, and goes 6 feet further than that, let's put him at the total of 10 feet off the ground, approximately.
Yeah, that'd be pretty close, 10 to 12, yeah.
Yeah, and the humanoids were 4 to 5 feet tall. So if
approximately 5 feet, yes.
If 5 feet, if he's 10 feet up, he's not much out of reach of their heads, at arm's reach. I mean, he's awfully close. This is not like he's 25 feet up and they're way down below him.
And it was clear to Mr. Shrum right away. I mean, he sensed deep in his soul as he has told us several times, that they were out to get him, is to use his terminology. And as we hear the audio clips, we're going to hear it from him as well. He says, you know, people have told us things like, maybe they didn't mean you any harm, maybe they weren't intending to do anything to you, but deep down in his heart, you know, he felt this intense pressure to fight these creatures off and to not allow himself to be taken by them.
Well, he was a specimen.
That's essentially the feeling that he got, that he was going. Yeah.
Let me listen to this again, the clip we just listened to. I want to hear that a second time.
And I heard some thrashing through the brush, and probably 5-10 minutes, these two humanoids come out of the brush, and they kind of broke some of the brush off and was looking at it. And then they came straight underneath the tree and looked up at me. And I knew right then I was fingered.
They found you.
Yeah, they found me.
Can you describe them for us? Tell us briefly what they
Yeah, they looked like 4 or 5 feet. Of course, I'm looking down at them, so they'd be shorter than they probably are. And they had a silvery, like a one-piece suit on, and it seemed like it had the joints, puffy joints, you know, on the shoulders and the elbows, and the legs I didn't see that clear.
Were you able to see their faces?
No, it was just a kind of a dark shadow. I could see the two like eyes that looked like welding goggles to me. They're the same as welding goggles, about 2 inches in diameter. It reminded me, just like I said, like a welding goggles. And then the rest of the face was kind of a blur. I couldn't see looking down at them.
Very interesting. Dan, Shrum, we have to go to a commercial break here. Any comment on what your dad's saying here?
Well, I know it really bugged him. He said so over the years, but it's kind of, like I said, you know, I know that one thing that he never talked about too much, just one of those little detail things, was that they relocated all the bad bears into that area. So that was actually one of his concerns of why he went up in the tree in the first place.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So the dangerous bears were relocated to that part of the forest. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, well, there was claw marks on just about every tree.
Uh-huh. Your dad did a wonderful job describing that. How do you feel when you hear your dad talking about this?
Well, I wouldn't be here if he didn't. So
yeah,
that's a good thing.
Very good. Okay, excellent. All right, stand by. We'll take a break and come back. More audio clips ahead as we continue to walk through this astounding event in the Tahoe National Forest in 1964. Okay, welcome back. We're talking about the amazing Donald Shrum 1964 case in the Tahoe National Forest. All right, Ruben or Noe, you want to set up the next clip, and we'll go ahead and listen to that.
Yeah, well, what happened next, Jeff, was Mr. Shrum saw the approach of these humanoid-type figures.
Right down below it. Yeah.
Yeah, they came right out of the brush. They looked up at the tree, at him in the tree, where he was trying to hide and hoping that all this action would pass him by. You know, he realized he was in the middle of something that carried some profound possible consequences for him. So, but what happened next was even more incredible, because there appeared another type of being that had obviously come out of the same ship, which Mr. Shrum refers to as a scout ship, and this other creature was distinct from the humanoid creatures. And in the next video clip that we're going to hear, Mr. Shrum's talking about the appearance of this creature that he describes as a robot, looking like a robot.
Mm-hmm. Now, the fascinating thing about this is that these beings and the robot, or whatever it was, were basically right below him. I mean, they were almost spitting distance, I guess. That close.
Absolutely.
Pretty amazing.
In fact, the humanoids at one point climbed on top of the large boulder at the base of the tree and started to climb up after him.
He could have reached out and touched them.
He was actually kicking at their hands and at their, at their head as
Wow.
they were trying to come up.
All right, here we go. Hang on.
Then I saw two flashing red, orange eyes just picking its way down the ridge, just between the rocks and around them and everything, and come down and was on this big boulder, this big flat rock. And then he kind of looked up at me and he moved his hand through the fires, cinders, and kind of scattered them. Then he come down up on the rock. He was about 7 feet from me, and then he touched his mouth, and kind of a steam vapor come out of his mouth, and it lit up his face so I could see some detail. And then I blacked out when that steam hit me. Kind of took the air from me, and I'd gasp for air and then black out, and I fell over my bow. And that's the only thing that kept me in the tree. And then so I figured they were out to get me then.
The eyes of this other creature, like the robot, what did that look like to you?
And it had kind of like fire. It's kind of a orangish, reddish orange, or yellowish orange. It kind of flickered like fire. And they're about the same diameter as, about 2 inches in diameter as the humanoids.
Did you hear any noise between them, any communication? Was there any?
I heard kind of a cooing, or almost like an owl, but it could have been an owl, that up there, but it just kind of fit in with them.
Fascinating again. The idea that he fell out of the tree and fell across his bow, and that's the only thing that kept him up in the tree. He wasn't in a harness, apparently.
No, at that point he was not harnessed up to the branch yet, because he had gone down for a while when he thought the helicopter was coming his way. He had unharnessed himself, and so when he got back up there, he did not attach the harness until later. After he had been, this gas started coming up from this creature, from this mechanical-looking creature. The gas would drift up into the tree, and it would cause him to pass out for a few seconds. Must have been some type of asphyxiant. Well, after that happened a few times, he decided to harness himself up. He went up higher in the tree and reattached his harness, but that wasn't until later.
So this robot, how tall was if we're going to call it a robot, how tall was the robot again compared to the two?
Well, here's the interesting thing, Jeff, and I've spent a lot of time listening to Mr. Shrum's testimony and also reading the documents in his case. He has said that both the humanoids and the creatures which he described as robots were both about 5 feet tall and had the same general appearance. They had the roundish eyes that looked sort of like someone wearing welder's goggles. They had the dark face, which seemed more or less featureless except for the eyes. And they were both dressed more or less the same way, kind of a bulky type. Could have been a suit of some kind, a space suit perhaps, or it could have just been their physical stature. But they were very, very similar, but the impression that Mr. Shrum got from looking down at them from up in the tree was that the creature that he described as a robot seemed to move more mechanically or more stiffly. And so therefore, to differentiate between the two types, he called the second being, he called him a robot. Also, the eyes were different. They had that reddish-orange glow as well. And maybe a little bit bulkier, the robotic creature versus the humanoid. But they were very similar in appearance, actually.
The robotic creature released some kind of asphyxiating gas or knockout gas, something to put him out.
That's
and
correct.
He lost consciousness for, what would you say, a minute or two?
And during that interval, the humanoids would attempt to climb the tree. So by the time Mr. Shrum came back to his senses, those guys were almost up close to him, and he would start kicking at them and shaking the tree, to keep from being abducted. As we're going to hear in the next clip, when you get ready to play it, it's going to talk about this battle between Mr. Shrum and these creatures that went on for hours, all night long. And he was in such bad shape. He was, without sleep. He was battling for his life. He was thinking about his young wife and his newly born daughter, and he was struggling in a really fierce battle, kind of his own personal war of the world to survive this ordeal.
Fighting for his life. Wow. Okay, let's take a listen to the next clip. Set this one up again, if you would, please, Noe.
Yeah, in this clip, he tells the whole heart of the matter, that long, approximately 12-hour-long struggle for survival that went on all night long. He describes how the creatures came after him and his various attempts to fight them off by shooting the arrows down at them, by setting stuff on fire, parts of his clothing and so forth, and sending fire down at them. He describes the big battle that occurred all night long in that tree where he was fighting for his life.
All right, here we go.
I had a 60-pound bow, which is a very high velocity. Seeing as how the robot's the only thing that was causing me harm, I shot the chest area, and it has the velocity of a rifle at that distance, because I'm only about 7-8 feet from him. And when I hit the chest, the sparks would fly like an arc welder kind of. And then that robot backed up and almost knocked him down. He kind of fell back against the rock, and the two at the bottom took off and headed for the brush and stood out there about 30 feet from me. And then I shot 2 more arrows, and about the same time sequence. These 2 humanoids would, every time I'd shoot, they'd go back up into the brush, just almost out of sight from me. Then I ran out of arrows, so I only had 3 left, and I thought, well, that's when pomade hair is just, the cap I had on was just soaked with oil.
This is for your hair, Paul.
Yeah, from my hair, yeah, pomade. And I always carried all kinds of books of matches with me when I hunted. And so I lit that cap, and it just blazed up, and I dropped it down the base of the tree. And just in that instant, they moved back about 12, 15 feet, and I glanced over at the ship that was over the canyon, kind of almost level with me, and it was almost out of sight. It was just like a star. It moved that fast, just in that second. So then I got the idea that they're scared of fire. So I burned everything but my T-shirt and my jeans, and come to find out later on that it was 32 degrees out, and I was shaking and kind of overexposed for the weather. Oh, when I after my hat, I threw my canteen down, and they'd picked it up and looked at it and threw it back down. And at one time I had a bunch of change, and I threw it down, and they all kind of gathered around it. Somebody told me on the coins that it gets dates, it gets pictures, so maybe that was the reason they got most of the coins.
So you didn't find any?
No.
What about the robot creature? What did this?
Well, after I started burning stuff and throwing it down, and I even tied some of my shirt that I ripped up to a compass so I could try to hit some brush, because there wasn't nothing right underneath the tree. And then I caught a little pile of brush on fire. I figured that would bring the cavalry. But when I run out of stuff to burn, I headed for the top of the tree, and then it was pretty sparse tree. I could see down to the ground, and I broke off the top and threw it down. And anytime I throw down or shake the tree, these humanoids would back up. When I was up in the top of that tree, I thought about just jumping off and jumping down the canyon and just killing myself. But the only thing that kept me going is I had the little girl, my wife, and that kept me fighting.
You can hear the emotion in Donald Shrum right there. He had a family, and he damn well wanted to get back to it. That's remarkable. We're going to take a break, and we'll come right back with more in just a couple of minutes. Okay, just hearing a remarkable story. Dan Shrum, when you hear your dad describing that night, and you hear the emotion in his voice about wanting to get back to his family, knowing in his mind he'd probably be gone if he gave up in any way, that he was that close to perhaps vanishing from this planet.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to hear. My dad, his emotion. I mean, it's just it's personal for me because he's my dad. So,
of course.
When to hear him get emotional like that, I know that it's genuine and sincere. He's not a man who just cries at the drop of a dime. So
right.
But when he does, he's always been a very sincere, open person about who he is and salt of the earth.
You wouldn't hear anything more sincere from anybody than that. What we just heard. Ruben, this idea of being in a tree, fighting for your life against three things, two humanoids and perhaps a robot or some automated something that shouldn't exist, that shouldn't be there in 1964 is pretty amazing. For him to come home and tell that story to anybody, I think in a way is even more amazing. A lot of people wouldn't.
Initially, when he got back to the camp, he shared that same story with his companions, and one of them did see an object fly over in that same general area. But the fact that he was able to share this with his wife and his close family, I'm sure they must have thought it was totally amazing. But to this day, it's still there, embedded in his mind. So, as Noe had said, Don was sharing with us his War of the Worlds.
Noe, any other details about that we should know about? The coins? Fascinating. The idea, a lot of our listeners may not know what pomade is. Pomade was a petroleum-based, kind of like Vaseline, that men used to put on their hair in the 50s and early 60s. Elvis used to certainly use it to get the height of his hair to hold it up. It was kind of like what they call mousse now, but it was pretty stiff. And that actually was flammable. It was interesting. He took his hat off and lit it.
Well, one of the interesting things, Jeff, we've received a lot of comments, of course, since our book came out. And I have received just a multitude of comments from people telling us how amazed they are that Mr. Shrum, with the few resources that he had at hand, was he only had three arrows. And
only three.
He only had his clothes. With the little bit of resources that he had, he was able to fight off these creatures all night long, and that really impresses people.
Now this went on for hours. What did they do? They kept coming toward the tree and trying to climb it. Were they standing around, looking, plotting, scheming, and the lighting, the visibility could not have been very good. He described their eyes as being bright and red, but other than that, what kind of lighting was available?
So the moon was out, and he had a little bit of lighting from that, but mainly it was just when the creatures, for example, when the robotic type creatures would issue out the smoke, there was a little bit of lighting effect associated with that, and he could see their faces at that point to some extent. But the amazing part of the story happens next, Jeff, because what happens is another robotic type creature arrives at the scene, and they make one final huge assault to try to get Mr. Shrum out of the tree, and that's what's covered in the next clip, the final battle, and what happened after that.
And this went on again for how many hours, Noe?
Approximately 12 hours from the time that he first saw the mothership until the time that he awoke, regained consciousness, and was just hanging from the tree alone, as we're going to hear.
Sure.
Amazing. Yeah. We have to take a break here, and we'll come back. And I'd like to actually listen to that last clip again, and then we'll move into the big battle as well. Dan Shrum, anything to add at this point?
Well, I guess another little detail about the whole area, other than bears, was lightning strikes. That was actually an area that was quite frequent, and most of the trees, actually, it's like every other tree was burnt by lightning or struck by lightning. My dad even said it just kind of spiraled down on some of them. Interesting.
An odd place in the forest for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, hold on. We'll come right back and listen to some more of Donald Shrum describing an epic battle to save his life. Literally, he obviously could have been headed for a pickle jar on board that ship. Who knows what they would have done with him. All right, we shall continue in just a couple minutes. Okay, let's get right back to our really amazing story here. What I'd like to do is play that last clip again, then we'll move on to the final battle. Here again, the descriptions by the man who experienced it, Donald Shrum.
Bow, which is very high velocity. Seeing how the robot's the only thing that was causing me harm, I shot the chest area, and it has the velocity of a rifle at that distance, because I'm only about 7-8 feet from him. And when I hit the chest, the sparks would fly like an arc welder kind of. And then that robot backed up and almost knocked him down. He kind of fell back against the rock. And the two at the bottom took off and headed for the brush and stood out there about 30 feet from me. And then I shot 2 more arrows, and it was about the same time sequence. These 2 humanoids would, every time I'd shoot, they'd go back up into the brush, just almost out of sight from me. Then I ran out of arrows, so I only had 3 left. And I thought, well, that's when pomade hair, the cap I had on was just soaked with oil.
This is for your hair?
Yeah, from my hair, yeah, pomade. And I always carried all kinds of books of matches with me when I hunted. And so I lit that cap, and it just blazed up, and I dropped it down the base of the tree. And just in that instant, they moved back about 12, 15 feet, and I glanced over at the ship that was over the canyon, kind of almost level with me, and it was almost out of sight. It was just like a star. It moved that fast, just in that second. So then I got the idea that they're scared of fire. So I burned everything but my T-shirt and my jeans, and come to find out later on that it was 32 degrees out, and I was shaking and kind of overexposed for the weather. Well, when I after my hat, I threw my canteen down, and they'd picked it up and looked at it and threw it back down. And at one time I had a bunch of change, and I threw it down, and they all kind of gathered around it. Somebody told me on the coins that it gets dates, it gets pictures, so maybe that was the reason they got most of the coins.
So you didn't find any?
No.
What about the robot creature? What did this?
Well, after I started burning stuff and throwing it down, and I even tied some of my shirt that I ripped up to a compass so I could try to hit some brush, because there wasn't nothing right underneath the tree. And then I caught a little pile of brush on fire. I figured that would bring the cavalry. That when I run out of stuff to burn, I headed for the top of the tree, and then it was pretty sparse tree. I could see down to the ground, and I broke off the top and threw it down. And anytime I throw down or shake the tree, these humanoids would back up. When I was up in the top of that tree, I thought about just jumping off and jumping down the canyon and just killing myself. But the only thing that kept me going is I had the little girl, my wife, and that kept me fighting.
Wow. Okay. All right. Let's go on to the next one. This is the final battle.
After I went to the top of the tree, I had a military belt, and I moved it out to the last hitch and put it around me and the tree. So in case I did get gassed, I wouldn't fall down. And then finally, these two humanoids stepped back from the tree, and another robot came, and there was two just about the same place that the two humanoids were, and they stood facing each other, and flames just like lightning, real bright, and it just came between them. And then the gas was so thick coming up the tree that it would dissipate just about the time I got to me. But then that's when I'd start gasp for air, and then when I woke up from that, it was light, but the sun hadn't come up yet. And I was just hanging by my belt, my head down, my feet down, and they were gone. Well, I knew I made it. I lived through the night.
Just go back. Did you fall asleep, or this gas? Did it overwhelm you?
Yeah, that's when it completely engulfed the whole tree and got up to me, and I don't know how long I was out, but it was just you could see just a dim glow of the sun on the clouds and stuff, not clouds, but in the sky. And then when I woke up, it was light, but the sun hadn't come up yet. I got down and I found my compass and no coins. The coins were gone, and my canteen. But I knew which way I shot the arrow and which way it would arc. So I found two of them and then tried to make my way back to camp. And I got almost to camp, and I just kind of fatigued and everything. I just laid down. And I heard my hunting buddy, whistling, and I yelled at him, and he come pick me up and help me to camp. I slept for about 6 hours because I'd been up all night, and then they didn't bug me until I woke up. Then I told them more of the story.
What was their reaction?
Well, they believed me because they saw the condition I was in.
Well, pretty incredible. Pretty incredible. Comments on that, Dan? Your dad really put it on the line there and toughed it out and made it. Or you may not have had a daddy.
Yeah, and I'm kind of a chip off of the old block. I kind of have a, survivalist attitude, I guess. Well, that and just kind of hanging around him. I've gone hunting with him and, desert four-wheel runs with him. We had a few spooky adventures where we thought we were accidentally in a missile testing site. But so, he's. I'm actually really proud to be his son. He's been an excellent father, and anybody who's met him has been charmed by him. He's just kind of a quiet, very charming man. But that's pretty much it. I can't say any more about him other than that.
How do you feel about the story now being put in a book and all that? I guess your dad would be pretty pleased with the way it's come out.
It's kind of strange because the same canteen that the alien picked up is the same one that I used to play with when I was a kid. I used to actually have that same belt and the canteen, and I got hours of enjoyment out of playing Army until my parents took it away from me. But as a kid, you don't even think about stuff like that. But when you're older, you go, "Oh my gosh, I actually was playing with the same canteen." I have the bow. Shortly after that, my mom says, "Well, you got to get rid of one of your bows," and so he took that bow and gave it to my uncle. And then later on, in my teenage years, my uncle gave me that bow. So I actually have his bow, the same one.
Very nice. Do we know what happened to the canteen and the belt?
He still has it.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. All right. Hang on to that for sure. All right, time for a little break, and we'll come right back. Okay, and we're back. Let's go one more time and listen to that the final clip here, where Don talks about the aftermath.
Did you have any nightmares or?
Well, for a year, I had, screaming nightmares. I'd wake up yelling, those eyes, and I'd be just a cold sweat, just be drenched with sweat.
So what happened for the Air Force?
Well, they made an appointment with two posted representatives of the Air Force, and they tried to disillusion me. They said, well, the Japanese might have had somebody up there, they were still... And they said Boy Scouts dressed up, in costumes just to scare somebody. And I said, yeah, I'm sure they're going to spend all night and keep a guy in a tree, Oh, then they said the Army probably bivouacked up there and it was in a training camp. So my father-in-law was in the Air Force. So he called and found out there was no military in that area for any reason, because it was a pretty desolate area. And they tried to disillusion me in every way they could. And they took the Arrowhead, the main one, and they said, well, we'll get back to you and you can have this back as soon as we get through with it, which I never did. But when I went back up there during rifle season, I found the other arrow, the third one. And when we went back, the area had been raked. There's an area probably 50 feet around that tree, and there was cigarette packages and cigar butts, and so I know the Air Force checked it out pretty good. And they had an easy way to find it, because there's an orange circle around that tree where it caught little fires, and it was showing orange, so they had no problem finding it. And I marked on the map that they had where it was, the location.
I don't mean to sound trite, but this is obviously a great screenplay waiting to happen. Would you have a problem, Dan, with this story being made into a film?
No, not at all. Because there's so many unanswered questions. We don't know if somebody reported it out of Reno or Incline Village or Tahoe even. I've always been wondering if the reason that they were in the area to begin with, these beings, was because of incredibly high electromagnetic fields generated by like a piezo effect caused by the granite.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always kind of stuck in my head. I've always kind of studied science, hard science, ever since I was a little kid. So that's kind of a nagging question I've always had. If anybody's actually, taken samples from that area.
Do we know what happened to the other arrow that your dad found?
I have no idea.
He probably would have hidden that away.
Well, I know my sister's got some of the, not the actual arrows that he got, but they're the same type that he made, because they're all handmade.
Oh, he made his own, huh?
Yeah, they didn't really have kits. You just kind of got a piece of cedar wood and glued duck feathers to it and trued it and put a tip on. That was it.
Did he shoot all the arrows at the robots, or did he take a shot at the humanoids as well? Do you know? Obviously he was a superior archer. He was very good with it.
Well, I think he said that he knew that if he shot one of the creatures, he'd probably die.
Good thinking.
So he figured he'd just shoot it at the robot. It wouldn't kill it, but it would harm it, scare it away, that kind of thing.
I don't know if I could think as logically and quickly as your dad did, Dan. That was very smart. He was obviously sweating, and that pomade went right through the hat, got obviously gooey, and he thought to light it on fire. That's really amazing.
Yeah, well, I think him being a hunter and but also, he was a highly skilled technician at Aerojet General. Not everybody could actually weld rocket chambers, because it was like tissue paper, and if you stopped, you'd burn a hole through it, and then you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of a rocket chamber being thrown away for a Polaris or Titan missile. He's just, he was highly skilled at what he did, so I think it's that and his hunting skills and his background growing up in Arkansas kind of made him who he is.
Very good. Ruben, anything to add to this? We have about 6 minutes left. You still there, Ruben?
Hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. What as Dan was mentioning, that his father is a very, very intelligent, very skillful and resourceful person. He used his wits, and that's what made him survive. And that's the thing that really impressed me. How he was able to outwit these guys. Or who knows what could have happened? Noe and I had discussed what would have happened if Don had a rifle. You know, maybe that would have been a whole different turn of events. But the fact that Don used these primitive weapons of using the bow and arrow, fire, and whatever at his disposal to stay alive, and as a result of this, we now have this incredible story. We have Dan in the background there, and thanks to Noe and Judy and all the other people to make this book happen. So,
what's amazing to me, and I'm not taking one speck away from Don's efforts, but you'd think that a technology that could fly a large craft with smaller craft in it, expeditionary craft, scout craft, retrieval craft, wouldn't have the ability to go up and knock something out with other than some kind of a gas. And it seems a little weird to me.
Well, in our book, there are other examples of other cases where witnesses have come across extraterrestrials where they actually had used gas.
Well, what was the one back east that is in Frank Frusciano's book? You know what I mean?
Oh, do you remember
the monster or the creature or something? They call it the black, not backwoods creature. Anyway, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That was a bigger object, and it also allegedly emitted some kind of gas.
Exactly, and Noe had a chance to talk with Travis Walton, and Travis, in his story, he mentioned how the extraterrestrials also used gas to knock him out as well. So it's interesting how they use the gas as one of their ways of
to anesthetize people. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, they obviously weren't a particularly violent species, or they would have killed him and taken him away, dead.
I'd like to add that if you were going to collect a sample, you wouldn't want to contaminate it with any kind of toxins.
Wouldn't think so.
So if they could have used a gunny sack if they had one at the time, they probably would have.
Oh. All right. Anything else that you can think of, Dan, that you'd like to add to the story tonight, which is just fascinating? You're obviously rightfully proud of your dad. That is an amazing encounter, and an even more of an amazing, I guess you'd have to call it, will to live. He withstood things that few other people probably would.
Well, like I said, if it was any other technology like a rifle or a gun, if they had superior weaponry, they probably would have either fused the metal or caused it to jam up or become red hot or with induction. And but I think because it's a bow and arrow, you can't really control wood. So good old wood, wax, and string. Primitive kind of wins every time. So
all right, amazing story. Noe, the book is out, and we should tell people again how to get it, and anything you want to add to the narrative as well.
Yeah, just a fascinating story. I've just been sitting here listening to Dan, listening to Ruben. Just fantastic to hear about this man's courageous struggle. The book is available at our website, roswellbooks.com. It's also sold at all the online retailers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and so forth. If they'll just search for Aliens in the Forest on Amazon, or we have the links to the Amazon page as well on our website, roswellbooks.com. And Ruben and I have actually been speaking at various conferences and festivals about the Aliens in the Forest encounter, and we're planning to do so again at the Border Zone International UFO Festival in Presidio coming up on October 19th and 20th in Presidio, Texas. So Ruben and I will be reunited there to speak about both the Mexico's Roswell incident, which we could do a whole show about, hopefully in the near future with you, Jeff.
Sure, that'd be fun.
As well as aliens in the forest. And I want to just send a shout out to Brad Newton, who's been, we were hoping to get him on, but we didn't have the time. He's been putting together that UFO festival we're going to have down in Presidio, Texas, a wonderful, charming little town on the Texas-Mexico border in the Big Bend country.
When is that happening?
That's happening on October 19th and 20th, so
okay.
It's in a couple of months.
Well, we'll bring him on next time you guys are back with us.
That sounds good.
Okay. Let me thank Dan Shrum very much for being here and sharing for the first time his views on all this. Thank you, Dan. It was really nice.
No, thank you for having me.
Okay. All right, and Ruben, thank you, my friend. Take care of yourself. And again, let's just honor the memory of that wonderful Joyce Murphy for a moment. What wonderful programs she provided for us years and years ago.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. All right, and Noe, thanks, my friend, for being here and making this all possible with Ruben. It was great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, talk soon.
Bye-bye.
All right. Okay. Well, that's been quite a program and quite a week. Thanks so much for being here. Hope you have a good weekend. Take care.